Hello, this is Dorena. I have 23 years of 12-step recovery, and I want to speak today a little bit about awakening our spiritual self based on that recovery. I was asked to speak on this topic at a retreat in January 2013, and this recording is a section of the talk that I gave. First off, I want to use diagrams to illustrate the process of spiritual awakening. This presentation I'm giving is just one possible perspective on the process of a spiritual awakening, and I hope you enjoy it. To start off, let me introduce the figures I'm going to use. First, we have the self, represented by a big purple circle. The self includes everything that we consider ourselves: I, me. It's our body, our minds, our emotions, our subconscious, our unconscious, our conscious, our soul. All of those things would be considered our self. My first question for you, okay, there's our self. Now, where is our higher power? Some of you might answer, well, the higher power for me is the 12-step fellowship or group itself, which is something outside of the circle. You might be using a higher power that's your sponsor. Or you might find that you have a transcendent higher power. Maybe there's a creator being, or God, or goddess, Buddha, tantric deity, angels. Those might be all higher powers that are helping you in your spiritual journey. And those things would be outside of yourself, transcendent. Some of you might answer, well, my higher power is love. It's spirit. It's when I go in nature, that's my higher power. Those are things that flow through us. They're without us or outside of us as well as inside of us. Love is something that circulates all around. Nature, certainly it's something that's within and without. So that's another aspect, a revelation of our higher power, that it's this spirit that connects us as well. For me, I've always found that the answers are within. And so my higher power that I experience most readily is this connection within me. And it's represented in this picture as a small black dot. So my higher power, or my connection to my higher power, is this spiritual center within me. Some people might experience that as their heart. They feel their higher power with their heart. For me, I feel connected to my higher power when I'm in my center. And that center I locate, it's an energy center called the Dantian, which is found, if you locate your navel, it'll be 2 finger widths below the navel, but in the center of the body. And it might be about 6 inches in diameter. It's like a ball there, an energy center. And that's what I consider when I'm feeling like I'm connected to that place. I feel centered. Sometimes people refer to this connection to their higher power within as a little piece of the source within. That they have this little piece of the source within, as well as there's this source without. One other thing we talk about in program will be represented by this black circle, and that's the self-will. Sometimes people refer to this as the ego as well. It's the part of ourself that has desires and cravings and aversions. It's what wants things or doesn't want things. And in our addictive state, we line up our self-will with our drugs of choice, and we're looking all over for something that's going to satisfy us, and our self-will is where we direct our energy and focus towards. In program, the highest use of the self-will is to bring us into an alignment with our higher power. And as you notice, the self-will isn't all of us. It's just a part of us. It's our self-will, part of ourself. So let's talk about the problem. For me, before program, well, I spent all my time eating, drinking, drugging, gambling, and spending too much. I engaged in behaviors that did not nourish me. They took the focus away from myself and they put it on something else. I was always looking for something to satisfy myself. I was preoccupied with others as well. I would obsess about other people and what they were doing. And I was also obsessing about events outside of my control. I had my self-will focused on things like these drugs of choice, as well as focused on things that ultimately I couldn't control. Where's my connection to my higher power? Well, it's blocked by my drugs of choice. Because of my obsession, my attention on these other things, I don't feel my connection to my higher power. I'm disconnected. This is the apparent problem. These behaviors and drugs and outside substances, my attraction to them is my apparent problem. What's underneath that and what's driving my apparent problem is actually a whole bunch of things like pain, like anger, sadness, depression, even my hopes, unmet needs and hopes were driving me to use my drugs of choice because I had fear that I wouldn't get my needs met. And I also had repressed trauma. I had trauma from my childhood that was unresolved, that was also causing me to self-medicate by focusing on anything I could besides the pain that I was feeling, because I didn't know how to relieve my pain. So we find in program that we've got an apparent problem, but then we also have sometimes a spiritual problem because we're disconnected from our higher power. But oftentimes we also have the psychological, emotional problem because of early trauma in our lives or inability to actually handle life on life's terms. What we end up with is an emptiness within us that we're trying to fill up with something, whether it be our drug of choice or whether it be in recovery, we end up using our higher power or source to make us feel whole again and satisfied. So this was my problem. I had a threefold disease. I had a physical problem, I had a psychological, emotional problem, and I had a spiritual problem. And the solution? Well, I admit that I had the problem, and I found something that I thought might work, which was the 12 steps. And I decided to try them, to give them a try. And that's steps 1, 2, and 3, right there in a nutshell. As soon as we do those steps, and oftentimes it is, as soon as we walked in the room, we've actually done those steps. We've made a decision to try something new, or we're checking it out at least, and we can change our mind at any time. But for me, that first meeting, I felt the love in the room. I felt people had something that I wanted. And that was enough for me to actually shrink some of my drugs of choice and help me feel connected. In fact, in the first year of my recovery, I didn't do the steps. I didn't have a sponsor, but I did feel the love in the rooms, and I went to meetings. And that was enough to give me a little more sanity than I'd had in a long time in my life. Eventually, though, I wanted more. So I began living in the solution, which means I worked steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And these are the steps that are designed to get that stuff that's in the way of my connection to my higher power out of the way. So even though I immediately felt a little spiritual awakening coming into the rooms, it wasn't until I did these steps that I began to get more of a connection with my higher power, or stronger, because the stuff that would float in and block it on occasion was being removed. I was taking the action steps to remove that stuff so that then I could stay connected to my higher power. And these are the steps. Oftentimes completing step 9 is where people really feel, ooh, they're free, and they don't, they really feel their spiritual awakening, their connection. Step 10, we take a personal inventory. We keep doing that on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a minute basis, so that we can keep the stuff that blocks the connection to our higher power cleared out. In early recovery, let's say someone yells at us. Well, it's only natural, we're in early recovery, that we would yell back at them. And our step 10, because we don't want to be stewing in the shame that we kind of blew it, because we called somebody a name, we did something unethical. And despite our reservations, because really they were nastier to us than we were to them, despite all that, we make an amends because we want to not obscure our connection with our higher power, because if we do get all those blocks back in, we're going to disconnect from our higher power, and we're going to end up using our drugs again. As we progress in program, step 10, which I consider is a development, that continue to take that inventory at all times, is actually a development of introspective awareness, and we call that mindfulness. And the development of mindfulness in step 10 allows us to not react when someone calls us a name or yells at us. Instead, we just we're not perfect yet, but we kind of maybe obsess about it a little bit. So it bounces around inside of us. And we might spend a little bit of time stewing about it, maybe having a little bit of resentment. So we're not acting out. We're not acting back because we've developed an aversion to making amends to people all the time. So we don't yell back, but we still have that stewing around in us. But we have enough recovery and we have enough tools that we learn how to reframe it, or we learn how to, we say prayers for the other person, or we use some technique that would allow us to connect back to our higher power. And then that anger energy just goes right down the drain, right down that center, right down our higher power, and diffuses and is gone. And I want to point out that even though we're doing a lot of this internal processing, we don't stuff our feelings. Once we've calmed down enough so that we're not going to react by calling someone a name or hitting them, we go back to that person and we can set boundaries. We can let them know how their actions affected us, and we can say what's appropriate and what's not appropriate for us. As we continue to work the steps, we move to step 11, and that is really about connecting with our higher power. It's aligning our self-will with our higher power, and we see here now that we're aligned with our higher power. We're in connection with our higher power. For me, in recovery, early recovery, step 11 looked like me sitting on the couch, and I would focus lightly on that Dantian, my energy center, that place I connect with my higher power, and then I would pray for guidance, and I would be open and receptive, and I would just see what popped into my head. Oftentimes, nothing would pop into my head. I'd just get up off the couch and do the next right thing. Sometimes I would get an inspiration, or I would get an intuitive hit or a solution to a problem that had been baffling me. Just by being centered and connected, that's what would happen. As we continue to practice these principles in all areas of our lives, that connection to our higher power grows. It's amazing. And this is a process that's not going to just reverse overnight. It's pretty stable. We're getting a bigger connection to our higher power. We're lined up with our higher power. So even if you have a relapse at this point, and it's still possible, you can come out of it and be connected to your higher power with the same kind of force or strength. So it's not like we go back to, we are recovering, we are developing. We don't go back to square one. We would pick ourselves up and go back to this kind of place. And you can see that the things in the outside have actually shrunk in size. So we've cleared out, not only is our connection getting bigger, but we've cleared out some of the things that give us problems in the outside. Now, at this stage, let's say we've got that angry person yelling at us. Well, that anger's got very little to bounce around on, right? It might bother us, it might hurt us, there might be fleeting moment, but the truth is that anger is going to go straight through us and into our center and be gone. Much different process. And the miracle that we have experienced, many of us, is that as we live this way, those angry people, they just seem like they don't show up in our lives anymore. We have, as we learn to be more ethical and kind, the people around us are also more ethical and kind. I want to talk a little about preventing relapse. It's not common in program to come in and to kind of have a pink cloud experience where for the first time we have hope, we have love, we have people around us that are growing and wonderful. And so we quickly move through the steps and clear out a bunch of stuff, and we're feeling really good. And we're blissed out, we're giving service, all these kinds of things. And then what happens next is our higher power is like, okay, things are good. The next layer comes out. Because a lot of us have layers of trauma from our childhood, and that next layer will come up that's been unresolved until now. And it blindsides us because we're not expecting it. And we might think, oh, the program doesn't really work, or get discouraged because we don't really know what's coming up. But that was my experience. I would have a craving, and I never could have just one craving, right? So there's a whole bunch of cravings. And what I found was that I had this, it wasn't just cravings coming out of nowhere. I had a sophisticated protective mechanism. There was something, and I had, until I was 40, I didn't realize I had repressed memories of my childhood, which was much more traumatic than I thought it was. I had severe abuse as a child. And my mechanism of protection was that I would never feel that trauma. I would never feel a memory coming up. I would never feel an emotion arising. What I would first experience would be the drug of choice. I was so good at protecting myself from those emotions that I would get a craving first. What I had to learn was that whenever I felt these cravings, I had to look for what was actually trying to arise, which was some sort of bad memory or an uncomfortable feeling. And I would have to sit with that, which was really hard. And I would have to actually dialogue with myself and spend time in the emotion that I couldn't feel quite yet. So I'd have to kind of go looking for it until it was able to fully express itself and be released completely, and I would heal. And it was amazing. And every time that would happen, my connection with my center would grow. I could almost feel it. I would come out more powerful, more connected. The process of spiritual growth and awakening will continue as we continue to practice these principles in all areas of our lives. That center will continue to grow and fill up our self-will so that we continue to work the program, we're maintaining this connection. What happens next, I understand, and the rest of these slides are adapted from Bernadette Roberts, who's actually gone through this whole process to, you'll see, the very end spot. And I haven't, so I can just fantasize about what it'll be like. But what happens next is that the ego or self-will falls away. And there's an irreversible change in us, which means we're completely aligned with our higher power. We can no longer deviate from our higher power's will. The feelings of self-doubt or questioning, are we doing things right, is gone. We no longer have those feelings of self-doubt. I talked to someone who was in this phase, and he said he'd been held up at gunpoint. The person was trying to mug him and asked for his wallet, and he just told him no. There's a sense of fearlessness when you're lined up with your higher power completely. You know, there's just a sense of fearlessness, and apparently he went home unscathed from the experience, so I guess it worked. There's this change that happens when you lose your self-will, and you get an incredible amount of peace. People talk about this as feeling like they're one with their higher power. It's called, in Christian mysticism, they call it the unitive phase. In Hinduism, I think this might be pretty close to what they call enlightenment, where you're what they call one with God, or one with your higher power. And that's the experience. There's still a self. You can see lots of purple left. And the higher power is now a big white center. And there's a sense of being one with that higher power in this phase. As you go along and continue to practice these principles, work your program, and it's the same program whether you're doing day 1 or you're doing day, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 35, 45 years later. It's the same program we work. We're just at different areas working on different things. But as you go through this process, the self continues to dissolve. And so you're getting more and more connection with your higher power. And it happens slowly, so it's not like, whoa, really different. It's the difference between, I think about when I came into program and the things I couldn't do and had no idea would be possible. I remember the first time I talked to my sponsor about a crush I had on a guy, and I found out that he wasn't interested in me. And what she said was, oh, just forget about him. And I thought she was crazy. Like, she said it in such a way that she thought I would be able to do that. Oh, just forget about him. Like, it's that easy. For me, that was impossible. I didn't even have a possibility that I could give up or let go of or somehow be relieved of that obsession, because it had already taken hold. Now, 20 years or maybe even 10 years after that date, I effortlessly can control what I decide to think about and what I don't. I don't have overpowering obsessions in general. For the most part, If I decide, hey, not to think about it, it's not worth it, it's gone. I don't think about it. But I couldn't even imagine that when I first came into program. So the same thing, as you get to these later stages, it's going to feel like, oh, I just keep doing the same thing, but things are changing a lot. And people early in program won't be able to relate necessarily to how amazing it is. We can see in this state, if somebody on the outside yells at you, there's a not very much self before it goes right into that hole and is gone. So you're not reacting to things. You don't even have to consciously worry about it. You just don't have the capacity to react the way you used to. You're not able to obsess about things the way you used to. And the self continues to be released away until there's very, very little self left. And in the next step, higher power takes away the last of it. Because they do say our problem is really one of self. So in the final chapter, the self is gone. There's no self left. And the self is created by consciousness. So in this state, we are no longer conscious in the way you and I are conscious. The person in this state is no longer a person, but they're no longer conscious in the way we are. There's some sort of awareness going on, but there's no duality. There's no self and there's no higher power. As you can see, if you lose self, the only way you were identifying higher power before was by the self's experience of the higher power. Now they're both gone. In Buddhism, this is called enlightenment or nirvana. It's the state where actually it's defined as a permanent cessation of all mental afflictions. Certainly as you went along, you had less anger, you had less jealousy, you had less anything that disturbed your peace of mind wasn't happening anymore. You just couldn't get upset about things because they were just falling away. When you get to this state, again, an irreversible state, just like the self-will falling away was an irreversible state. You've got an irreversible state where you no longer can ever feel a mental affliction again. No longer will you ever have a thought that disturbs your peace of mind. Because every time you had a thought that disturbed your peace of mind in the past, it was focused on something that wasn't real. And in this state, you're actually abiding in a state of ultimate reality. You're in truth itself. And my understanding is that you can look back and see what, I'm seeing right now, which is conventional reality. You can have an awareness of conventional reality, but you also are abiding in ultimate reality. And people sometimes, when they get to this state, say things like, I am God, because there's no other way to explain it. Because you're no longer joined with your higher power, joined with God, like the unitive face. You actually don't experience God in yourself. It's one thing now. Whatever you're experiencing is one thing. So it's not a lot of words that are going to be able to describe that. But it's just a taste or a flavor of what's to come, that as we continue to develop along the lines we've been developing, we're going to end up reaching these final goals. There's no stopping it. So thank you for your attention and time. I look forward to us all reaching that state of nirvana and eternal peace. And I offer you blessings along the way.